I need some traction.
So we've arrived at the end. We got one more talk left today. And we've talked a lot about growth today. But if you do growth right, you're going to attract a lot of attention. And if you do growth right and attract attention, someone will hopefully want to buy you. And when we talk about purchases, I think AppDynamics is one of the first ones that jumps to my mind when Cisco bought them for $3.7 billion. $1 billion. That's a lot of money. So we're going to welcome to the stage Jyoti Bansal, founder of AppDynamics, as well as interviewer and TechCrunch extraordinaire reporter, Frédéric Lardenois, to close up our evening. So please welcome to the stage Jyoti and Frédéric.
Thank you. Still people here at 5, no, it's almost, well, 5:30. You just got here.
I just got here half an hour ago, yes.
So he just flew in for this and he's going to fly out again. You flew commercial.
I did, yes.
I'm surprised by that.
Well, commercial is not that bad.
You have not moved to the private jets phase just yet?
Not yet.
You're thinking about it?
Probably, yeah.
That must be a nice feeling, though.
Yeah, I think that I feel more pressure than anything else, because everyone asks me, why are you flying commercial? So.
Here I thought I was somewhat original. But, your story is fascinating from top to bottom, really. You came to the US on a visa when you first started. Tell me about that. How did you start out, and what made you start a startup?
So I studied computer science in India in one of the top schools there, and I was really fascinated by startups. And so I said, okay, if I have to do a startup, maybe I should try to go to Silicon Valley. That's the place to be. So I started applying for a work visa in startups in Silicon Valley, and then I applied to a whole bunch of them back from India, and I got a job in one. And that was right after school. I was 21 years old, just graduated, and I came to Silicon Valley on a work visa, and I worked in a few startups because I was like, I need to work in startups to learn about startups. And it's really fascinating to work in startups. You learn a lot from what didn't work. Because my startups, the very first startup I did was the exit was an acqui-hire kind of exit for maybe a couple of $1 million. My second startup was because we couldn't figure out how to sell the product at all. Really great product, but no go-to-market model. And the second startup was we could figure out how to build the initial product, but the company couldn't figure out how do you expand from there. So it kind of plateaued around 20 million of revenue, and then it was sold for a small multiple of that. Then my third startup was growing well, and it was acquired for about $400 million. And so I kind of learned a lot from what works, what didn't work, and I couldn't start my own. I was bubbling with ideas sometimes, but I couldn't because you're restricted when you're on a work visa in US on quitting your job and starting a company. So when it took me some time to get that approval, once I got that approval, and I was burning with this idea for what we do at AppDynamics. And that's when I started.
What fascinated you about startups so early on?
I think it's really the part of starting from scratch and building something, going after something. That's fascinating. I like technology. I really like I'm a computer science. I'm a programmer by training and all, right? But I also really like business. So I always like business as much as I liked engineering and building things. And to me, the startup is you can do on your own pace. You can do whatever you really, not whatever you like, but close to whatever you like.
Whatever the board lets you do, and your investors. Yeah. Yeah. What made you come up with the idea for AppDynamics? Because it's not maybe the sexiest kind of. And maybe explain what AppDynamics did actually as well.
Oh, sure. So what AppDynamics does is monitoring and instrumentation of complex software systems. So say if you go to Expedia.com or go to JP Morgan Chase.com or any complex software application, we would help the engineers monitor and troubleshoot when something goes wrong. So it sounds like not very sexy, right? It's just monitoring and troubleshooting of software. so when I was starting out, and I would go and pitch to VCs, that a lot of times people will ask me that, like, yeah, monitoring of software, what's the big deal, right? And I'll tell them, like, look at every company, like, look at, like, a friend of mine used to work at Wells Fargo then, and they had like 32,000 software engineers working in Wells Fargo. There was more software engineers than most software companies in the world, right? So I was like, if you have 32,000 software engineers building all these software apps, you definitely would spend money making sure it works well, right? And there you hear all the time about, like, outages happening and software doesn't work or glitches happening, and it's impossible to build perfect software. So, but as the software complexity grows, understand what's going on is very hard. So I thought the market was very, very big. Like, every large company will spend millions of dollars as they build more and more software. Like, if you look like a Walmart is trying to become a software company, better software company than Amazon. That's they are trying to, right?
Sure.
So there is no shortage of money, monetization, because there's so much software being built in doing software tooling. So when I was starting, the software tooling wasn't very sexy. Now it's like, since there has been a few interesting big successes, now it's, everyone is starting to chase it, but definitely it wasn't at that time.
Sure. Talk a little bit about what it was like starting your own company, though, because you were at, is it Wiley Technologies? They got acquired by CA, and out of that came AppDynamics and New Relic, two companies that do something very similar to what Wiley was doing as well at the beginning, right? So there's an interesting dynamic there, I think, where you picked up where maybe your previous company or the company you worked for previously couldn't continue on or didn't get better, or what made you pick up the same topic?
Yeah, I would say part of it was, so Wiley was acquired by CA, and CA is kind of a company where really you can't innovate or do anything interesting.
Why is that?
It's just the culture of the company. Like, it's very bureaucratic. It's very, so there are so many people who would say no to things. Culturally, they would not really allow you people to think broadly, right? But what was happening was, like, this was like 2008, 9, around that time, right? When the say public cloud was very, very just starting to get big. You had like virtualization and kind of more microservices, or there was a big architectural revolution happening. So it wasn't really an incremental change from Wiley to the next generation. It was a big step function change from Wiley to the next generation. So we all had the same realization that you can't do that inside CA. CA, you can do incremental changes, but you really need rethinking of it for these next generation of architectures that are being built, right? So that's where we actually had 4 companies that started out of Wiley, not just 2.
Oh, really?
2 became big, the other 2 didn't.
What were the other 2?
There was a company called Blue Stripe that was acquired by Microsoft for their some technology and talent. There was another one which shut down in a year. It's a company called Makara, which was acquired by Red Hat for their PaaS platform.
All right.
It's
a mini mafia there you've got going. So, when you started, it was 2000 and, remind me. 8. So it's a while ago now. You started small with just a few people, right? What was it like growing that company as a CEO and after you've been an employee for so many years?
Well, the good thing is you start as one employee, so the transition is slow. Like, so, I was CEO for 8 years out of the 9 years of AppDynamics. And when I got off the CEO role, we were about 1,000 employees. But if I had to run a 1,000-employee company on day 1 being an employee, that would be hard. But it's like you start with 1 employee, then you hire a second one, and then you hire a third one, and you kind of grow, and you learn on the job. As a founder, that's the only way you would learn on the job. You learn different skills, right? So you definitely, what you have to achieve is very different. Initially, it's all about, like, getting funding to get off the ground, right? Then you have product market fit. That's where you have to really focus on building the product, working with customers, hiring engineers to get there, right? So you learn skills around those, like how would you go and hire engineers? How would you go and find customers to talk to? How would you get the right product market fit and build the product and all that? And then the skills that you need changes to, like, how would you go and sell it? Right? So then you have to learn about selling, and I spent a lot of time just starting to become an expert in sales. And then it starts to become, like, at some level, how do you hire senior people? Like, how do you hire like an executive who's probably 20 years older than you to work for you, like a senior executive in some role, right? So and manage them, and the skills keep changing. And then as you go closer to IPO, which we were a day before the IPO, we sold the company, right? So then the skills change a bit on like how do you manage the operational scale and be ready for public markets and things like that. So you have to constantly learn. That's the only way.
How do you do that though? Because you're trying to run the company, you're trying to learn. Did you have mentors or who taught you?
Well, I wish I had like one or two great mentors. I tried to find, but it's very hard to find like one or two mentors. So my model was more, let's say, issue oriented. Like, okay, what do I need to learn? And that also determined not just by like some theoretical what do I need to learn. It's like what do I need to learn to the next. To move the company to the next step, right? So I need to learn about selling into large enterprise. So then I would go and like find like 5 or 6 people who are experts in selling into enterprise, and just I will try to go and grab a lunch or coffee with them. Sometimes I will try to hire them as advisors if I could convince them to come in as advisors, so that I could learn that from them.
Sure.
So instead of like one mentor, say let's like it's more topic oriented.
Did you learn from your mistakes as well?
Oh yeah.
What kind of mistakes did you make?
So AppDynamics was pretty successful by all measures, like a multi-billion-dollar outcome and everything. But the reality is, in being inside building it, things are never perfect. Right? You're always like this is wrong and this is wrong, and you're many crisis situations are happening and all that. So a lot of mistakes you make are like sometimes like not deciding on something fast enough, or missing out some change in the market trend, or sometimes like hiring wrong people or not correcting those mistakes fast enough. And there are mistakes that you constantly make. I think the key is how quickly you recover from a mistake. And so how quickly you would realize and not have your ego come in and fix it, that's very key.
So you fired a lot of people?
Unfortunately, I did. I remember the very first person I fired, very early on, we were like less than 5 employees. I couldn't sleep for four days before I fired him, because it was so hard to like fire. It's like he quit his job, came in a very small team, 5 employees, and then I had to fire him. And it was very hard. Like over time, you learn like that's part of doing your business. If you're not firing someone who is not performing well, you are doing injustice to the rest of the employees. Like, so if hundreds of employees, you're doing injustice to them, right?
Sure. As you're growing the company, though, as you're going from 4 or 5 people to 100, 200 people, you run the risk of not being able to innovate anymore too, right? Because structures get ingrained and politics start playing a role. And once you get to 1,000 people, that's a whole different issue. But how do you work around that?
So I had the same issue. Like we were slowing down when we were growing from 100, 200 to 4, 500. We started to slow down on innovation. So what I did was I completely restructured our company to what we call startups within startup. So for like different innovative products that we wanted to build and the areas we wanted to go, so I organized especially the product and engineering organization into 6 different startups. So that we could bring the same innovation kind of thing instead of like slowing down and having bureaucracy and very large set of processes, etc.
How do you structure something like that? Because then those teams have to talk to each other too, I guess, right?
They have to. So they are like startups still working on a platform. So they're like not completely independent startups. So because they also leveraging like a shared platform, a sales platform, and a marketing platform, and a financial platform. But they could take the product and innovation mostly independently with some shared things.
While you were building that, there was a bunch of competitors at the same time too, doing something really similar, right? What do you think made you stand out from them, or how are you even able to differentiate the different offerings at that point? Because everybody's doing application platform monitoring.
Well, there will always be competitors. Whatever you do, there will be competitors. And I think it's really about out-executing competitors. Your product has to stand out for a tech company. That's anyone says like you can outcompete the competition without a great product. That doesn't work. But then you have to some binary differentiators in the product, not just like small differentiators. And we had, I won't go into the tech of it, but we had a few binary differentiators. But then you really have to also work very hard on sales execution, because if there's a race when your competitors, there's a race for grabbing the market share, and if you don't go and move fast, your competitors will. And then it becomes more of a perception thing that if your competitor is bigger than you, much bigger than you, then everyone, even if you have a better product, everyone would perceive they have a better product because they're bigger than you, they're doing better, right? So you have to make sure that you execute on sales very well.
What was your strategy for that? Because you were competing for the same customers.
Well, our primary competitor, we actually didn't let them compete in our, so it also depends on like, so we were focusing on large enterprise, and our primary competitor, we boxed them, New Relic, into the small, the SMB market. So they were doing very well in SMB and startup, and we said, okay, let's, instead of trying to compete in both markets, let's go and win the enterprise market, and let not them easily come into enterprise market, we'll box them into SMB market. And we did that very well. So both companies did well, but we did, I would say the enterprise market is 3 to 4x bigger than SMB. So we could continue high growth in enterprise longer, and we're still growing really fast. SMB market, the market is not as big, so they were forced to move into enterprise, and that takes like another 2, 3, 4 years to try to do it. So they're still going through that, right? So, but that strategy of like boxing them into SMB worked well for us.
How do you box another company in though?
Well, you set the criteria for the market. Well, like what does an enterprise need, and what does an SMB need? And we'll talk about it, like, enterprise needs these things, and we do these much better, and don't buy from a company who would not provide you for these reasons. And we'll also tell like SMB needs these which we don't have, and that's okay, like, and so you can go and buy from our competitor there. So that's, so you have to kind of set the stage.
I think they want to kick us off the stage, but I think we've only had 15 minutes, if somebody can check that. All right, thank you. Lloyd is the boss, so he gets to tell us that. We can jump ahead a little bit, though. If you're, the story of your exit is extraordinary. You were supposed to IPO, which is a big step to begin with. And the day before, you throw us all off by selling the company to Cisco for $3.7 billion. What led up to that? Because that doesn't happen very often. Not the day before an IPO.
We did announce the day before, but it did happen pretty fast. Like, about 10 days before the IPO, we were doing our roadshow, and Cisco came in and made an offer. So it was a surprise for all of us. But it didn't really come completely in, that we didn't have any relationship with them. So we were trying, last year, since last summer, we were trying to form a partnership with Cisco, like a resale kind of partnership. Cisco has been a big customer of AppDynamics for a long time. So 10 days before the IPO, they said, instead of doing that reselling partnership, why don't we go and buy you? And we buy you before the IPO. And they made an offer, we said no. They made a second offer, we said no. And then they made a third offer, which was kind of like interesting enough for us to not say no. But we were.
It was interesting enough, but you go another round to get more money.
Well, I think that was we had, see, that's the thing, like, it was $3.7 billion, but we're still, there's a lot of debate in our board. It's not that it was a slam dunk and we were all dancing and happy with that. Like, there were half I still had to, just to get everyone, because we were so close to the IPO. Even like emotional things, like, we had 50 of our first 50 employees were going to NASDAQ to ring the bell, and half of them were already there, and they got like special suits just for the IPO. And so like when we told them like, hey, we're not going IPO, we've sold the company, and it's like the largest private company acquisition ever, $3.7 billion for software and all, and those people were like so unhappy, like what would happen to my suit? And what we did was, like, when the deal was closed, like officially closed in April, we did go to NASDAQ. We took all of those 50 people there, and we did ring the bell.
Did they wear their suits?
They did wear their suits.
Good. They would have been very...
So we made it part of the deal with Cisco. We told them Cisco has a lot of influence with NASDAQ, right? They're one of the big company on NASDAQ. That why don't you arrange us ringing the bell anyways? So we did that.
So that's a very symbolic ring of the bell.
It's a symbolic ring of the bell. But it's always a bittersweet thing to sell your company as founder, where you could put like all this energy in building something, and selling is a bittersweet kind of thing always.
For sure.
For
sure. That guy agrees. That's I think he's very sad he sold his company, but that's...
And I'm not surprised. I went through so many emotional journeys in that the week after, or the week before and the week after, and all our employees, once we announced it, all our employees did that. Like the first time we announced it, it was like just people were sad and silent.
Sure.
Like what just happened? And you would think like this is such a great news that we're announcing, and then it started to sink in and all that.
Were your employees sad because they were expecting to make a lot of money with the IPO and it didn't work out the same way for them after sale?
No. Financially, this was much better than an IPO outcome. Like we would not have IPO. So Cisco decided to pay us close to about twice the price at which we would have gone IPO. Right? So we probably would have traded and built into that price because the company is doing well. But it was half the price. It was if we just went IPO. So it wasn't a financial thing. It's like just it's bittersweet. Like people because if people are building a company to build a great company, you really don't want to sell. That's what it becomes.
And you build a culture where people felt comfortable enough. Then it's the set the stage for me though of that moment where you finally signed that last piece of paper. Were you in a hotel room in New York waiting to go to NASDAQ as well?
No. I was negotiating the whole thing. So I was here in I was there in San Francisco. No.
Biggest deal ever in Vancouver.
When we were negotiating, but it was in a lawyer's office, like independent lawyer's office, where Cisco's lawyers and we were negotiating and doing things. Normally, once we verbally agreed. So we verbally agreed our board with Cisco on Saturday morning. That on Saturday morning yes, we'll take this deal. But we were going IPO on Wednesday. So it was that the deal has to be signed by Tuesday. And so but we still were doing our roadshow on Monday and Tuesday because if the deal is not signed, we still gonna go IPO on Wednesday. So we had to dual track. We couldn't even tell our IPO bankers that we are doing this because we were still on the roadshow. So that it was kind of I think on those 4 days, I think I slept for 2 hours total in 4 days. Because so normally signing a deal like this takes about 2 to 3 months. It took 3 days for us to sign it.
It couldn't have taken any longer. What was it like being at that roadshow though, where you're trying to sell investors your company and it's not going to happen?
No, so we were not certain that it's not going to happen. So we were very serious about 50% that we go IPO, 50% this works out, and we will do both tracks even in the last all the way until it's signed because we didn't want to delay the IPO at all, right? So yes, it's hard to do that. How do you do both? Sure. But you just have to put your professional face on and do it.
You learn to fake. You would be a good poker player then.
Yeah. Well, our CFO and the new CEO we have, I would give them a lot of credit on doing. So we also were able to divide and conquer. That I was leading the one side and they could do the other side.
For sure. Now you decided not to go to Cisco after the. What's the reason for that?
Well, I decided not to go to Cisco. I'm involved with Cisco as an advisor and as a mentor kind of role. I decided not to go in an execution kind of role because we do have a really strong team in place. And I do feel very confident, very comfortable that we'll keep doing really well. The AppDynamics group inside Cisco will keep doing very well. Cisco did decide to leave us independent there, and so we'll independent, autonomous mostly. So all that is good. So I would say we have a good transition plan, good team in place. So I feel very confident, very comfortable with it, right? So and for me, it was a 9-year journey there. I have a really strong team in place now, and I'm looking to see what I can do, beyond this over time, right?
For sure. Are you planning to start a new startup? What are you thinking about?
That's part of it. Yes, I'm looking at interesting new ideas and experimenting with few things. That's what I like to do. I like to build companies, build products, build businesses. So I don't want to retire and not do that.
Fly around in your private jet.
Yes, that's why I'm not doing that yet.
You've made some investments too, though, right? I think you announced the first one. Was it this week? So.
There was one was announced
for you maybe a little bit early, but yes. Yeah. What are you looking at when you're investing right now? It's the first time you're doing that.
Yeah, so I'm not a professional investor. I invest in good companies, but mostly in good founders. I like to invest where I really like the founders and I really think I can help them, and they want some help. So I would make an investment as part of helping them. But another thing I also look at with the market opportunity is large, and the founders are passionate to kind of build it for the long term. They're not looking for a short, quick exit. They want to build for the long term. So that's kind of my criteria normally. I made I would say 7 or 8 investments. I don't make large investment, but I made 7 or 8 investments in the last in the last 4 or 5 months. But the criteria is simple. I don't have I'm looking for a particular space or particular technology. I'm looking for interesting big problems, passionate founders, and founders who are thinking big.
Sure. Are you an active kind of investor, or are you letting them just do their thing, or are you waiting for them to come to you and asking for questions?
Yeah, I'm not an active investor, but I'm this advisor investor. So I'm an investor. People are most of the companies I'm investing in, normally they can get money from others as well. They're taking my money because they want some help and some advice in some way, and I would say, okay, if I'm gonna help and advise you, I'll invest in the company. I have so I'll have some skin in the game there. So I'm not an active investor. I'm normally not the lead investor, but I like to help and advise these founders.
Sure. What's the number one advice you give them?
Number one advice, many times they're product founders. I come from a product and engineering background, and I had to go and learn selling and develop a passion for selling. And so that's the one thing I advise them. If you're a product founder, go and be comfortable with the lifeblood of your business is going to be revenue. So be comfortable with that, and learn that well. So that's always my number one advice.
Why is it so hard for developers to sell?
I guess it's a part of it. As developers, selling is a bit, everyone thinks selling is about some kind of a smooth sales guy who's schmoozing with customers. It's not that. And most developers have that perception, and that's why they are sales sounds too complicated, complicated. I don't understand that kind of stuff, right? But there is really a science behind it. So once you start getting the science behind it, people start getting comfortable, the numbers game, and how you manage the funnels to how do you recruit around it and all that kind of stuff. Right?
Sure. Awesome. Once you've learned to sell, you can sell for $3.7 billion and buy a private jet. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I need some traction. You need some traction. Let's get some traction.